This morning we're on lesson 10 of the workbook of A Course in Miracles. And there's one line. My thoughts do not mean anything. My thoughts do not mean anything. And as he says in the lesson, he says, now we're going to get a little bit personal. We've talked about these thoughts don't mean anything. These thoughts, what I see doesn't mean anything. These thoughts, and now today he gets personal and says, my thoughts do not mean anything. So it's my thoughts that we're talking about that do not mean anything. And I suppose this could bring up a lot of resistance if in fact you have an identity that's based upon what you or others consider your ability to have thoughts that are considered to be valuable, or other people and yourself consider the thoughts meaningful for your own very existence. You know, like you're a bank president, or you're a spiritual teacher. You're the head of a church. You're a father, a mother. And the thoughts that you think you have about the things that you're engaged in your daily life seem to be so important for the outcome of the life that you think that you're living and you're engaged in, and other people who are involved in you. So I can see how when we get to the point where the 10th day, where it says, my thoughts do not mean anything, there can be some personal resistance and personal feeling of being insulted that come up. But remember, my thoughts do not mean anything. And you just asked once again, it's not about understanding. It's about the application of the idea in the manner that you're asked to apply it for the reason that you've embarked upon the actual doing of the workbook. And again, the first part of the workbook is designed to bring about the loosening of your mind from its fixed position of thinking that there is some validity in the thoughts that I use to make it through the day. And what we're attempting to do is undo the entirety of that thought system, so that perhaps you can begin to laugh about some of the ideas you've had, some of the things you've thought you've had to do in order to survive, and free yourself from the limitation of your own thinking, free yourself from the bondage of even thinking that the thoughts are actually thoughts, so we can get down below the surface sort of tension that listening to our own thoughts produces, and experience thoughts that are in line with the kingdom of heaven and the peace of God. Let's take a look at what it says. I'll get stuck in this one particular paragraph. I think it's the third paragraph. It says this idea, and this idea applies to all thoughts of which you are aware or become aware in practice periods. The reason the idea is applicable to all of them is that they are not your real thoughts. Okay. So you're being told you have real thoughts, true thoughts. And a distinction is being offered to you between the false ideation of your mind and the ability to find the truth within yourself. So there is a distinction being made that obviously you must accept you have not been able to make before, or else this lesson would not be offered to you the way it is. So if we have made the distinction before, and we'll do so again, you have no basis for comparison as yet. Okay, it's important. That'll get rid of some of the personal insult, What you're being reminded of is you just don't have the basis. You don't have a fundamental understanding, a fundamental um, idea, something whole and perfect yet, that you can compare these thoughts that are running through your mind. As he says, they just float with it. There's no substance to them. They just sort of run through your mind, and they go on and on and on and on and on, and you just think them mindlessly because they're not any thoughts at all. And that preoccupation with those thoughts is what's keeping us from sinking below that into where we can experience a little bit reality. Now here's the line. I have no basis for comparison as yet. When you do, you will have no doubt that what you once believed were your thoughts did not mean anything. When you do, when you experience a basis for comparison, you will have no doubt that what you once believed were your thoughts did not mean anything. And in that instant, you will experience a freedom and a joy that's unparalleled to anything or any joy or freedom you thought you could have by following the thoughts that lead nowhere. Um, and I think it's important to recognize that you're being told, you're being offered something that's going to make a definitive difference. And once that occurs, you will have a basis for comparison, so you won't take the thoughts that you think you're thinking, the ones that run through your mind, haphazardly. You won't take them seriously. You won't hold yourself in the stricture, in the tense nature of those thoughts. And you'll feel more freedom within yourself. And it'll bring about a joy and a lightheartedness that was not able to be found before. Um, and that's what we're looking for. I mean, wouldn't it be nice for once and for all to have an experience that produces no doubt, where you're very clear. You're clear about the fact that what's real cannot be threatened and what's unreal doesn't exist. And in that instant, now you'll have something in your mind. There'll be a bright spot. And you'll be able to call upon that bright spot. It's not that you're not going to no longer have these thoughts running through your mind. It's that you're no longer going to take them as seriously as you once did before, nor will you use them in ways that hurt you and seem to hurt the relationships that you are having and you're involved in around you. This aspect of the correction process began with the idea that the thoughts of which you are aware are meaningless. The ones that outside rather than inside, rather than within, and then stress the past and the present. That now we are emphasizing that the presence of these thoughts means that you are not thinking. And again, we're training our mind in a systematic way to look upon, to think about everything entirely different than we previously did before. And once you have this experience that produces no doubt, you're going to want to be able to continue to think along these new lines that produce experiences of reality, rather than have you continue seeking for what can't be found in places where it never was in the first place. So with these exercises, we close our eyes for a second and we just introduce the idea. And he says further, this idea will help to release me from all I now believe. Now, that could be a scary thought. That could bring up some fear. But remember, the fear is attached or associated with all that you now believe. You can anticipate that there would be continued fear, but you can't prove that there will be continued fear, especially when you get the idea that the fear is associated with the thinking of the meaningless thoughts. Because when you start to have meaningful thoughts, they won't produce fear. They will, as a matter of fact, begin to introduce something called love. You'll begin to get a new idea of what love actually is. Not as a concept, but as a release from your thinking. Everything happens in the release. It's all in the release. It's all in the letting go. One of the things that I'd like to say about this also is when I did these lessons, I had already gone through a number of experiences that did in fact show me that all the thinking that I had, all the ideation that I had, all what I thought was true, what I thought was going on, none of it had any reality whatsoever. And there were these revelatory experiences that came. Now, one of the things that we're being asked to do is to not hold on to even the revelatory experiences, at least the form of them, at least the ideas that we've attached to the experience. Because they have the ability to keep us in just as much of a static condition as any other thoughts. We want to learn to remove the frame that we have around the picture so that the picture is free to expand and extend the light that we experience in our revelatory moments, the love that we experience when for a second we let go of the grievances and hate. We want to allow that light, that brightness, that love, that truth, that reality to begin to become all pervasive. And we do that by freeing our mind from all thoughts. Even the concepts that we use to justify the revelation that we have. None of our concepts are true. Salvation can be seen as release from concepts, and that's what this is hearkening to. So that's today's lesson. There's an interesting line at the bottom of what I'm reading from. It says, this idea will help to release me from all that I now believe. If you are honest with yourself in making this distinction, you may be tempted to obscure it. And you may be tempted to obscure it because perhaps you haven't seen without a doubt that your thoughts are meaningless. And the ego is trying to maintain some sort of semblance of existence within you. But be honest. Be honest to the best of your ability to not exclude any of your thinking in what you're willing to let go of. Not that you'd have to find out if you don't have to let go of all your thinking as if you know what that is and there's a quantity of it that you want to get rid of. It's the willingness. It's always the willingness to follow the guidance, follow these directions as they're given. And it's your little willingness unites with the great willingness of the Spirit of wholeness and of Jesus from whom these words come. And together, enjoined with each other, you can have an experience of something you could not have had when your mind was preoccupied with my thoughts and the need to justify them, with the thoughts that I need to justify my life here, as if these thoughts are just. There's no need to justify your life, because God created you whole and perfect, and you need no justification for that, because there's nothing other than that to justify it against or to. So let's practice this idea today. When you become personally insulted, if somebody reminds you, wait a second, those thoughts don't seem to mean anything to me, don't be personally insulted. Just apply the idea. Today's idea will help release me from all that I now believe. Now, if you're arrogant and think that there's things that you believe that you must continue to believe in order to survive, then you're going to run into a problem. And that's the resistance that the ego brings up. So you may be tempted to obscure these distinctions. Resist not evil. Don't resist the temptation, just notice the temptation. And notice it's your own thought. So it doesn't really have the meaning that you give it that will cause you to have to follow it and do what it says. Meet the demands of your own thinking. That's not necessary. You're perfect and whole as God created you. There's nothing you could do about that. So that will be today's lessons. My thoughts do not mean anything. You have no basis for comparison as yet. When you do, you will have no doubt that what you once believed were your thoughts did not mean anything. And that will bring you a joy that is not of this world, and that you could not find in any of the thoughts that you did previously give meaning to. So that's today's lesson, and we'll be back again tomorrow.